A lone Navy SEAL sat on his porch, swallowed by a frozen, silent world. He was convinced the war had stripped him of everything, his comrades, his tranquility, his very purpose. Then from the snow, a pair of tiny German shepherd puppies appeared, trembling and whimpering, their paws raw from the biting ice. As one leapt into his lap, pressing its small paw to his heart, he went still. For the first time in ages, something wasn't asking him to fight, but to protect. And what those two small lives would show him was enough to melt the coldest winter and his own heart. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. The winter morning was filled with a silence that felt sacred. A blanket of snow covered the valley near Jackson, Wyoming, reaching to the horizon like a vast white sea. The pines bent low, with the weight their branches dusted in silver. The sky was a shade of pale gray, the kind that foretold of another storm coming before night. On the edge of this silent landscape sat a small log cabin, simple and strong, with a thin curl of smoke rising from its stone chimney. Within, the soft crackle of a fading fire echoed in the quiet air. On the front porch sat Ethan Cole, a steaming mug of black coffee held tightly between his calloused hands. At 38, the former Navy SEAL looked far older than his years, though it wasn't time that had aged him. His face held the sharp lines of discipline, a square jaw-high cheekbones, and a faint shadow of stubble that followed the unforgiving line of his jaw. His short, dark brown hair, lightly streaked with gray, captured the dim morning light. But his eyes, a distant steel blue, told his true story. They were the kind of eyes that had witnessed too much. The eyes of a man who once thrived on orders and was now lost without them. He gazed across the snow-filled yard to where the fence dissolved into the tree line. His breath plumed like smoke, gentle and slow. Deep within him, a hollow ache resonated, but it wasn't from pain, but from memory. The war had stripped so much from Ethan. His sleep, his laughter, the rhythm of a simple day. He had left the Navy 3 years ago after his canine partner Valor was lost during a rescue mission in the mountains of Afghanistan. He wore the dog's tag ever since, right there on the same chain as his own personal tags. Some nights he could still hear the ghost of a bark that once meant move or I've got your back, but now there was no one left to lead the way. The morning was silent until the first sound broke through, faint, nearly lost, on the whisper of the wind. A soft whimper. Ethan froze, listening intently. It came again, this time much closer. It sounded fragile, desperate. He leaned forward, placing his mug aside. From just beyond the snowdrifts by the porch, something was moving. Two small shapes battled through the white expanse, their fur matted and frozen, their every move labored and slow. At first, Ethan figured they were fox kits, but as they finally reached the porch, he finally saw them clearly. Two tiny German shepherd puppies, no more than 6 weeks old. Their black and tan fur was now stiff with ice and dusted with fresh snow. One limped slightly, the other pressed tightly to its sibling's side, shivering violently. Their eyes were wide with a profound fear, yet held no wildness. There was a desperate plea in their gaze, a look that sliced straight through the walls around his heart. "Where did you come from?" he whispered. The smaller one took a tentative step, lifted a tiny paw, and rested it softly upon Ethan's knee. The contact was slight, but it sent a shock through the icy calm. Ethan felt his throat tighten. For a stark moment he was on another porch, one in Kandahar, kneeling beside his partner Valor, whispering promises he was powerless to keep. He swallowed hard, blinking the ghosts away as the puppies whimpered, pressing closer. Ethan extended his hand, slow and deliberate. The sudden warmth from their small bodies was a jolt against his frozen fingers. "So, hey, it's all right," he murmured, his voice a gentle whisper he thought he'd long since forgotten. A tone of comfort, not of command. Then a voice called from the fence. "Ethan Cole, you talking to yourself over there again? Or did you finally go and find some company?" He turned. It was Nora Walker, his neighbor. She stood bundled in a heavy brown coat, and a knitted green scarf. At 70, she carried herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd weathered worse heartbreaks and worse winters. Her gray hair peeked out from her wool hat, and her cheeks were flushed crimson by the cold. Nora was a nurse once before retiring to the countryside. Since Ethan took their cabin 2 years back, she'd made it her own quiet mission to check on him, partly from kindness, and partly because she couldn't abide the enveloping silence. Ethan lifted a hand to greet her. "Morning, Nora." She squinted, her gaze fixed on his porch, her sharp eyes softening as she spotted the little shapes huddled by his feet. "Oh, good heavens. Puppies. Found them in the snow," he said softly. "Or maybe they were the ones who found me." Nora's breath plumed in the cold air as she smiled. "Perhaps the Lord is finally sending you some company that listens." She tilted her head, then added, "Sometimes the right lost souls find each other when it's cold." A smile nearly broke through on Ethan's face. Nearly. Instead, his gaze fell back to them. The smaller one was shivering so hard its tiny body just rattled. Without saying another word, he scooped them both into his arms. They were lighter than he'd imagined, ribs a faint outline beneath their fur. As he carried them inside, he felt a tiny heartbeat, fluttering weakly, a fragile pulse against his chest. Inside the cabin was dim but warm. He placed them near the hearth and went to find an old towel. He began to dry them one after the other with a slow, deliberate care, like someone disarming a delicate bomb. The larger pup, the one who'd walked steadily, had a thin scar around its neck, the kind left behind by a rope pulled far too tight. Ethan's jaw tightened into a hard line. "Someone did this to you," he muttered. The smaller pup sneezed. Then it nestled its little head right against his hand. Its wet brown eyes looked up, holding a perfect fragile mix of fear and trust. An ache tightened in Ethan's chest. He hadn't realized just how much he'd missed being needed. Outside, the snow began its slow descent again, thick flakes sticking to the cold window panes, catching the firelight like distant fading stars. Ethan settled onto the floor beside them, hearing their breaths deepen and steady. For the first time in an age, the cabin no longer felt like a grave. A soft knock came at the door, and Nora peeked inside a loaf of bread cradled in a cloth. "Brought this for morning," she said softly. "You'll need your strength after saving those little ones." Ethan could only nod his thanks. Her gaze softened, falling on the puppies by the hearth. "You know, Ethan, after my husband passed, dumb. I felt like God himself had gone silent. Then one day a stray cat found its way to my garden, half-starved with only one eye. I fed her that once and she never left. I used to believe I saved her, but now I know. She was the one who saved me." Ethan looked up, his face a mask he couldn't let slip. "I don't know if I can believe in things like that anymore." Nora's eyes were kind. "Belief isn't something you find with your eyes, honey. It's what you feel when the quiet finally starts to break." She drew her scarf close and turned back out into the falling snow. "Keep them warm," she added. "Maybe they have something to teach you." As the door latched, Ethan turned his gaze back to the fire. Both pups were now sound asleep, their small bodies nestled together, tiny bellies rising and falling in perfect time. The firelight painted their coats in hues of gold. Ethan reached out a hand gently, brushing away the last traces of frost that clung to their tiny paws. "Rex," he whispered, nodding to the stronger of the two. "And what about you?" His eyes fell to the smaller one, whose head rested softly on his worn boot. "Luna." He leaned his head back against the cold wall, his eyes lost in the dancing flames. The sound of the fire filled the emptiness that had long haunted him. Outside, the snow fell thick and heavy, but within these walls a change had begun. It was a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. For the first time in so long, Ethan Cole was not entirely alone. The following days unfolded in a quiet rhythm, the kind demanded by a deep Wyoming winter. The snow would arrive near every afternoon, draping the pines in white and muting the world to shades of gray. But inside the cabin, a different kind of warmth had started to take hold. It wasn't just the fire crackling in the stone hearth. but the new sound of little paws scurrying across the old wooden floorboards. Ethan Cole hadn't known this kind of life inside his home for years. Those two German shepherd puppies, Rex and Luna, had transformed his cabin from a tomb of silence into something breathing. Rex, the stronger of the pair, was fearless and curious forever, investigating corners and sniffing at old boots, while Luna, still small and a little fragile, chose to stay close to the hearth, her gentle brown eyes tracking Ethan's every single move. She'd cock her head when he spoke as if she understood every word. Ethan had dug out an old wool blanket for their bed, folding it beside the fireplace. And every single night he'd find himself watching them curl together, two tiny souls breathing as one. Sometimes a smile would catch him by surprise, but other times as the fire died down and the shadows grew long, he would remember another German shepherd, older, stronger one, who had slept at his feet on combat nights a world away. That memory always brought with it the scent of dust and cordite, and an ache that settled deep within his chest. He shook the haunting thought away, forcing his attention back to the present. He gently tended to the puppies' wounds, feeding them morsels of warm chicken. Within a week, Rex's limp had all but vanished, and a new strength began to fill Luna's small frame. They were his shadows now, following him to the porch, where he'd sit with his coffee, gazing out at the silent, drifting snow. But one morning while splitting firewood, something odd at the edge of his property caught his eye. A faint scar in the white canvas, a tire track nearly erased by the last snowfall pointing directly toward the tree line. He knew it wasn't his, nor was it Nora's. Crouching low, he traced the deep groove with a gloved hand. It was disturbingly fresh, not more than a day old. Behind him, a single sharp bark from Rex cut the silence. Luna whimpered, pressing herself against his leg. Ethan rose slowly, his eyes narrowing on the deep woods. The track led north toward that forgotten stretch of land the old-timers called Hollow Creek Farm, abandoned for more than 20 years. The place was steeped in dark, local lore stories of strange sounds and hunters who simply vanished. Ethan had never been one for old wives' tales or local gossip, but the raw instinct in his dog's reaction sent a cold ripple of dread through him. He returned to the cabin, setting his axe by the door, and tried to push the feeling away. But as night fell and the wind began to howl, Rex started barking again. This time it wasn't playful. It wasn't the joyful yaps of a puppy, but a deep guttural warning hurled into the oppressive darkness of the forest beyond his home. "Sure." "Easy, boy," Ethan soothed, kneeling beside him. But Rex remained a statue of tension, his body rigid, his ears pinned forward, his gaze locked on something in the blackness that Ethan couldn't see. Luna began to whine her fear, a palpable thing in the small room, trembling by the hearth. Grabbing his heavy flashlight, Ethan unlatched the door and stepped out onto the frigid porch. The air cut like a razor, his breath pluming in white clouds. The forest stood as a black, silent wall, the moon casting an icy sheen on the snow. Not a thing stirred, and then from far away he heard it. The faint, low hum of an engine, deep and distant, before fading back into the night. He stood there frozen, his knuckles white around the flashlight. The sound was gone now, completely swallowed by the rising wind. Turning back inside, his jaw was set like stone. The next morning, as dark coffee filled his mug, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. When he opened it, Nora Walker stood there again, bundled in a thick maroon coat and wool gloves, her cheeks flushed from the biting wind. She held a small basket covered by a cloth, and the warm scent from it reached him instantly. Warm, spiced apple pie. "You look like you could use something sweet," she said, her voice kind, as she stepped past him into the warmth. Her eyes fell to the floor, and she let out a soft laugh as Luna and Rex trotted up to investigate her boots. "Well, would you look at you two? You've already wrapped him around your little paws." A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "They keep me on my toes." "That's a good thing," Nora said, knowingly placing the basket on his table. She peeled off her gloves, rubbing her hands together for warmth. You know, I was in town yesterday and old Martin from the feed store was going on about some strange sounds he's been hearing at night. Said he heard trucks on that old North Road, the one that runs past Hollow Creek. A deep frown creased Ethan's brow. That road's been closed for years. Nora nodded gravely. It's supposed to be, but Martin swore he saw headlights slicing through those woods around midnight. He's thinking it might be poachers. The sheriff was out last week, but he came up empty. She paused, her eyes searching his. You never really sleep, do you? Always on watch? For a heartbeat, Ethan's face turned to stone before it eased again. Old habits. Nora's hand found his arm, a gentle, steadying touch. You're still standing guard, even if the battlefield has changed. It's just who you are. After she drove off, the house felt profoundly empty. Ethan stared out the window, his gaze fixed on the tire tracks bordering his land, now ghosted over by fresh snow. He couldn't escape the image of those headlights slicing through the darkness. That afternoon, the sky bruised over the wind, honing its edge. He pulled on his coat gloves and boots and led Rex and Luna out for a brief walk. The pups tore through the drifts, their joy a world away from his. Luna tumbled over a hidden drift, glancing back as if mortified. A soft laugh escaped Ethan, a sound he hadn't made in what felt like a lifetime. But at the far fence, the laughter died. The tire tracks were there again, fresher cut deeper into the snow. He knelt beside it. The impression was wide, a heavy truck, likely a 4x4. Someone had driven through within the last few hours. His gaze swept toward the woods. The forest stood silent, its limbs weighed down with snow. Yet somewhere out in that distance, he caught a glint of something like light hitting steel. A low growl rumbled in Rex's chest. Luna pressed against his boot. Ethan rose, scanning the tree line, every instinct firing. He took a steadying breath, watching it cloud the air. Tomorrow, he murmured under his breath. We'll see where this road leads. As they returned to the cabin, an unseen creak echoed on the wind, perhaps shifting timber or a far-off door latching shut. The sound pursued him all the way until his own door clicked closed. Inside, he stoked the fire, watching the pups nestle together on their bed. He sank down beside them, a hand combing through his hair. For the first time in so long, it wasn't just his ghosts he felt eyes on him. He glanced again through the iced-over pane, where the woods held a secret fighting its grave. Fresh snow had begun to fall softly, burying the evidence of the intruder outside. Ethan drew a long breath, whispering into the quiet room. Not tonight, tomorrow. But a cold certainty settled in his gut. Whoever left those tracks would be back. Morning broke frigid and clear. A cold so sharp it sliced through fabric and seared the lungs with every breath. The woods around Ethan Cole's cabin formed a white labyrinth of frozen stillness. The overnight snow had ceased, leaving the world glazed in the pale light of dawn. As the sun crested the peaks, the vast expanse of snow ignited into a field of diamonds. Ethan stood on his porch, each breath a cloud in the frigid air. His eyes traced the faint trail where the tire marks once were now mostly hidden, but still clear to a man who knew how to read the snow. He had tracked before, but never anything like this. Rex was at his side, his black and tan fur shimmering with a fine coat of frost, his head low nostrils tasting the wind for any threat. Luna hovered close behind. Luna smaller and more cautious, her tail tucked low, but her ears ever vigilant. Ethan knelt beside them, his gloved hand a warm reassurance as it swept through Luna's thick fur. Stay close, he murmured, his voice a low command meant only for them. Both of you. He slung his pack over a shoulder, a simple canvas bag carrying only water, a flashlight, a small worn knife, and a radio that hadn't found a signal in months. He wasn't marching into combat, but a primal instinct demanded readiness. Old habits, he thought grimly. Some things never truly fade. The forest answered them with a profound stillness. The only sounds to break the silence were the rhythmic crunch of snow under Ethan's boots and the soft metallic chime of the dog's collars. The trail, a faint scar in the white landscape, led them away from the solitary sanctuary of the cabin, winding between towering pines whose branches groaned under the heavy burden of snow. The air was sharp with pine sap and a cold metallic tang. After nearly half an hour, they emerged into a small clearing where the tracks abruptly diverged. The deeper indentations veered north, climbing toward a much steeper incline. It was then that a dark stain against the pure white caught his eye, half buried in a drift. He dropped into a crouch. It was a frozen patch of blood no bigger than a silver dollar. Nearby, snagged in a tangle of brush, lay a length of coarse rope. One end was sliced clean, the other frayed as if from a struggle. He turned it over in his hand, a deep frown creasing his brow. This wasn't hunting gear. It looked industrial, the kind used for heavy crates or cages. A cold knot formed in his gut. Rex growled low, his gaze locked on the path ahead. The wind shifted, and on its current it carried a scent that didn't belong. Rust oil, something metallic and profoundly wrong. Ethan's jaw clenched. "We're not alone out here." He whispered the words, stolen by the wind. They pushed on, and with every step the character of the forest seemed to darken. The ground sloped down into a shallow ravine where weathered fence posts jutted from the earth like broken teeth remnants of some forgotten homestead. The birds had fallen silent here, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath, hesitant to disturb the oppressive quiet of this place. A half a mile in the trees parted, and that's where he saw it. At a sharp glint of sunlight off glass, a figure was moving near a snowbank, slight, quick, and unmistakably human. Instinct took over. Ethan's muscles coiled tight. He raised a hand, a silent command for Rex to stay, and stepped forward. His boots making the only sound in the clearing, the figure spun at the noise, and a woman's voice, sharp and sudden, shattered the silence. "Whoa, easy there." She was standing next to a small snowmobile. One of its skis was sunk hopelessly into a massive drift. A camera hung from her neck, its lens glinting in the pale winter sun. She was bundled in a long gray parka trimmed with faux fur, a pair of snow goggles pushed up on her forehead. Loose strands of auburn hair had escaped her wool hat, brushing against cheeks, flushed a bright pink from the biting cold. "I thought you were a bear," she said, her laugh a little breathless. "Or worse, a park ranger." Ethan allowed his shoulders to relax, but only slightly, his own voice remaining level. "A ranger wouldn't have snuck up on you. You're stuck." The woman nodded, slapping the fine snow from her gloves. "Yeah, I was tracking elk, trying to get some photos for a winter feature." "I thought this trail was clear. Guess I was wrong." Ethan took a step closer, his eyes studying her, taking in every detail. She looked to be in her early 30s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a confident air, though he saw her hands were trembling slightly from the cold. There was a restless energy about her, the unmistakable mark of a person far more comfortable chasing something than standing still. "Name's Clara James," she offered, acknowledging his guarded stance. "Freelance wildlife photographer." She paused. "And you are Ethan," he answered plainly. "Ethan, the rescuer of stranded photographers in the deep woods," she teased lightly. No smile appeared, but a faint flicker lit his eyes. "Ethan Cole." Clara tilted her head slightly, curiosity illuminating her face. "Cole, you're military." Her gaze settled on the faded navy insignia still sewn to his jacket's shoulder. "Was," he replied, "a lifetime ago." She studied him quietly, her teasing tone completely gone now. "You still look like someone who wakes at 0500 to check the perimeter." Ethan ignored her comment, crouching by the snowmobile to inspect the ski. "You'll need leverage to get this out. It's frozen solid." As he worked, Clara watched nearby, seeing Rex and Luna sniff curiously around her gear. "They're gorgeous," she murmured. "German Shepherds, aren't they?" "Yeah," Ethan confirmed. "Found them by my cabin a week back. Someone just left them to freeze." Clara's face fell. "People can be true monsters." "Yeah," he quietly agreed. But sometimes they're a reminder not to become one. Together they worked the snowmobile free. But when Clara hit the ignition, the engine coughed once and went dead. She groaned aloud. "Fuel lines must be frozen. I'm stuck out here." Ethan's gaze drifted north to where tire tracks disappeared into the dense woods. The sun was climbing higher, its light glinting on the snow like shattered glass. He turned back to her. "You have no business being out here alone anyway. Something's not right about this place." She lifted a skeptical eyebrow. "Not right how?" He paused, then gestured to the trail. "Tire tracks, rope, and blood. Somebody's used this road lately and it wasn't hunters." At that, Clara's journalistic instincts fired up instantly. "That sounds like a real story. Can I tag along?" Ethan considered her for a long moment, weighing the danger. She didn't look like she'd scare easily. "Keep up and you can come," he finally conceded. "Deal," she replied, grabbing her camera and throwing the strap over her shoulder. "And if we run into Bigfoot, you're buying me coffee." A faint smirk touched his lips, but he didn't answer as the trail wound deep, growing darker as storm clouds gathered above. They followed the tracks until the path squeezed between the trunks of ancient pines. Their bark was scarred and split. Rex's hackles rose. Luna pressed close to Ethan's boot, and that's when they saw it. At the far edge of a clearing stood a dilapidated wooden barn, partially collapsed, its heavy roof sagging from the weight of countless winters. The paint was long gone, leaving weathered gray wood exposed like a skeleton. A rusted weather vane creaked faintly in the wind. Clara raised her camera, snapping the photo. "That place must be 100 years old." Ethan's expression hardened. "Older, maybe." As they cautiously approached, Rex started to growl, a low guttural sound. The air felt different here, thick with the faint odor of decay. Ethan held up a hand, signaling for Clara to halt. He crept toward the door, sweeping snow from the handle. A heavy chain secured it, but the wood around it was rotted and weak. Then a sound came from within, faint but clear, a faint, pitiful cry. Clara froze, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Was that—" "Yeah," Ethan said. "It's alive." Rex barked once, sharp and urgent, a chilling reply. Ethan locked eyes with Clara, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Whatever's in there, it doesn't belong here." They remained frozen as silent snowflakes drifted down around them, their gazes fixed on the dark door that seemed to inhale the frigid air. Then from within, a second whimper grew nearer and more desperate, the undeniable cry of a creature pleading for rescue. The door protested with a groan as Ethan forced it open, unleashing a blast of icy air, carrying the stench of decay, of rusted metal, and a sickeningly sweet odor of rot. His flashlight beam pierced the oppressive darkness, sweeping over splintered rafters, dancing dust, and the cold gleam of metal. He gasped. There, under the drooping beams and shredded webs, were endless rows of cages, dozens upon dozens. Clara moved to his side, the camera shaking in her grip. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice a ghost. Her words hung suspended in the frigid stillness. Ethan advanced cautiously, his boots pressing into the wet ground. The floor was black, darkly stained in patches, the foul odor intensifying with every single step. The cages varied in size, some cruelly small and tight, others vast enough to imprison a deer. Inside them, a flicker of motion. He aimed his light at the closest one. A red fox cowered in the corner, its coat matted and lifeless, its ribs stark against its shivering frame. Next to it, 2 owls huddled on the cold floor of their enclosure, their wings brutally clipped, their eyes vacant. The faint clinking of chains echoed from the barn's depths, chased by a thin, broken cry that sounded eerily human. Clara pressed a gloved hand to her mouth. "My God, it's a prison for wildlife." Ethan remained silent. His light swept the walls, revealing hooks, wire cages, and old tools stained with rust. The pattern of the place felt chillingly familiar, making his stomach churn. Confinement, cold order, brutal efficiency. It was the same twisted logic he'd witnessed in war zones where atrocity disguised itself as simple routine. He turned to the center aisle and froze. A larger cage stood there, ominously empty. Its bars were bent inward, the metal scarred with deep, desperate scratches. On the ground, he spotted a trail of paw prints leading toward the entrance. He knelt, tracing the impressions. Small but deep, and recent. Rex trotted ahead, his nose pressed to the ground, whining softly. Luna trailed behind him, her ears pinned back. She crept toward the empty cage, tested the air, and gave a short, hesitant bark. Ethan's head snapped up. "They know this place," he stated quietly. Clara's camera drifted down. "What are you saying?" He rose, his face a mask of stone in the gloom. "This is where they were held." The truth hit her with the force of a punch, and with trembling hands she panned the camera over the endless cages again. The sound of the fox crying, the owls scratching, the howling wind. It all bled into one unbearable cacophony of pain. Someone was holding them here, but why for sale for fighting? Ethan's jaw clenched. Both, or worse. He crossed to the far wall, kneeling by an old table buried in documents, and wiped away a thick coat of dust. Beneath it lay ledgers, maps, and what seemed to be shipping manifests. He pried one open. A cold list names numbers, weights, species. A ledger of lives bartered for profit. His breathing was steady, yet a cold rage smoldered behind his calm gaze. He drew a small black device from his coat, a field GPS whose screen cast a faint green glow. "Coordinates," he muttered. "These go to the authorities." Clara shadowed him, her camera still recording. "This footage will blow the lid off this," Clara said. Ethan cut her short. "No time for stories now. We get what we need. Then we get out." They moved as one down the aisle, documenting every last cage, every single mark, every trembling soul inside. The beam of Ethan's flashlight fell upon a small pen in the corner. Inside, a rabbit lay motionless, save for its breathing, its fur matted and damp. Ethan knelt, reached in, and gently lifted it out. It didn't struggle, just stared with glassy eyes. He wrapped the creature in his scarf, whispering, "You're safe now." Clara's camera captured the image, a soldier's rough hands holding something so fragile, something still alive. But before she could speak, Rex growled a low, warning rumble that made the very air feel tight. Luna whimpered, pressing close against Ethan's boot. He froze. Outside, something stirred. A crunch of snow. Slow, deliberate, not the wind. Ethan killed his flashlight instantly. The heavy darkness swallowed them whole. Only thin slivers of light bled through cracks in the wood. He turned to Clara and mouthed one word, "Quiet." She nodded, clutching her camera tightly. The sounds grew louder. Boots on frozen ground. The groan of hinges, then the low rumble of a man's voice. The huge barn door slowly creaked open, spilling a narrow blade of light across the floor. A figure stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a thick, fur-lined brown parka. Its seams were dark with grease. His face was coarse, unshaven, a face seemingly carved by years of cold and cruelty. A black knit cap was pulled low on his head, and a heavy flashlight gleamed in his hand. His breath clouded in the frigid air as he muttered to himself. "Stupid animals," the man grumbled, his voice low and rough. "Always crying, always hungry. Should have let the cold just finish you off." He moved down the aisle slowly, the beam from his light sliding across the cages, the walls, and the dirt. Each time his light passed an animal, he gave the bars a kick, testing them. A fox whimpered. The deer shifted weakly. The man didn't seem to care. He kept moving, humming a tune under his breath, a jagged melody that made Clara's skin crawl. Ethan crouched low behind a stack of hay bales, his body coiled and ready like a spring. He could take the man down easily. One strike, then silence. But Clara was with him and the dogs. Any mistake could throw this place into chaos. He held a hand up, slowly signaling, "Stay down." Rex froze beside him, his muscles taut. Luna trembled, her eyes wide. Clara crouched behind a crate, every breath controlled. The air was thick with tension and the smell of rust and fear. The man stopped by the empty cage, the very one Rex and Luna had recognized. He stared at it for a long moment, his flashlight playing over the bent bars. "Escaped, did you?" he muttered. "You won't get far. Not in this weather." He knelt, running a dirty glove along the ground, tracing the paw prints. "Two of you." His voice grew menacing. "So where are you hiding now, huh?" Ethan's pulse pounded in his ears. He remained frozen. He could see the man's shadow stretching out, inching ever closer to their hiding spot. Clara stifled a gasp, her camera shaking in her grip. The man straightened up once more, a dark silhouette, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, left then right, then slowly toward the back. The light sliced just inches above Ethan's head, then across the hay bales where Clara was huddled. She squeezed her eyes shut. Rex remained perfectly still, utterly silent. The man frowned, his boots scraping ominously on the floorboards. "Someone's been in here," he growled. He pivoted, his eyes narrowing on the tracks near the door. "Ethan's." He knelt down to inspect them. "Not mine," he whispered to himself, "and they're too fresh." He rose slowly, the flashlight beam lifting with him. Ethan held his breath, signaling with a silent motion, a subtle gesture with two fingers. "Hide!" Clara gave a single terrified nod. She clutched the camera to her chest and slipped back behind a wooden beam. Rex moved with her, his tail tucked low in silent solidarity, while Luna crept low beneath the shadow of a trough. Ethan remained exactly where he was, every muscle coiled and tight, his eyes locked on the intruder. The man started toward them, his heavy boots thudding the cone of his light, crawling ever closer. Each footstep echoed through the barn like a drumbeat of fate. Ethan could feel his own heart pounding against his ribs. He lifted one hand, fingers faint in the gloom, and signaled again with silent urgency. "Don't move." The man halted just feet from their hiding place. His light lingered on the ground, sweeping over scattered bits of straw. The sound of their breathing filled the void, one ragged one steady, both laced with fear. And then he suddenly snapped the flashlight higher, aiming it directly at the shadows where Ethan was hidden. Ethan held his breath. He became a statue. His hand remained raised, a silent command to Clara and the dogs. "Stay still." The man's beam drifted over the old crates, across the hay, then arced toward the rafters. He grunted in frustration, then turned away. The beam of light swung back toward the door, but his voice hung in the darkness. "Next time I find someone snooping," he said, his voice a low promise. Almost to himself, "They won't be walking out of here." Ethan remained perfectly still, his muscles screaming in protest until the door groaned open again. The man's footsteps receded 1, 2, then vanished into the raging storm. For a long, silent moment, no one dared to move. The barn fell silent again, but for the soft sounds of breathing Ethan's, Clara's, and the deep, steady beat of their hearts in the darkness. Ethan held his pose, one hand still raised, his gaze fixed on the door. Snow filtered through the roof, drifting down like soft ash. He finally let out a slow breath and whispered, "Don't move yet." His voice was a ghost of a sound, lost beneath their hammering hearts. It was the kind of silence that felt heavy, that had a weight all its own. As if the walls listened, Ethan kept his hand up, a silent command for Clara and the dogs to stay put, as the last echo of footsteps was consumed by the night, leaving only the frantic rhythm of their own hearts in the crushing dark. For a long, breathless moment, no one dared to even breathe. The intruder's footsteps vanished beyond the door, swallowed by the howling wind. The old barn seemed to exhale, its timbers groaning softly as if in relief. Ethan was frozen, his hand aloft, every muscle drawn taut. Only when the sound of footsteps faded into nothing did his arm drop as he whispered, "Go?" Clara's eyes adjusted to the pitch black, her gaze wide with a mixture of terror and cold. She nodded, hugging the camera to her chest. From behind a toppled trough, Rex emerged, his fur on end, yet he moved without a sound. Luna followed closely, tail tucked her breath, a nervous cloud in the frigid air. Ethan crept to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. Only the hollow cry of the wind replied. He waited for a few more heartbeats, then twisted the knob and eased it open. A vicious gust battered him, driving a spray of snow into his face. The blizzard had become a beast while they were inside. He looked at Clara. "We have to go now. Stay right with me, trust the dogs." Clara's lips were bloodless. "In this we will get lost." "Better lost than found," he stated grimly, and plunged into the whiteout. The night became a solid wall of white, with snow lashing sideways, thick and blinding. Each snowflake felt like a sliver of glass against their skin. Rex forged ahead, nose down, moving with pure, certain instinct. Luna kept close at his heels, glancing back every few paces to ensure that Ethan followed. Ethan battled onward, the biting cold slicing through his coat, the wind screaming past his ears. Clara faltered behind a ghost in the swirling maelstrom. Then her boot lost its grip on a sheet of ice, and she fell hard. He spun immediately, grabbing her arm and hauling her back to her feet. Her face was raw from the cold, her eyes bright with terror. "Keep your head down," he roared over the wind. "Stay on my left. Don't lose Rex." Clara nodded her teeth, chattering too violently to speak. The storm's howl intensified, erasing every other sound from the world. Ethan's vision was cut to only a few feet, but his faith in Rex was absolute. The dog moved with unwavering purpose, weaving between dark tree trunks swallowed by snow. They fought through drifts that reached up to their knees, breathing in ragged, sharp bursts. The path twisted downhill, the snow thickening as they neared the creek. The current was hidden beneath a treacherous sheet of ice, but its low rumble told Ethan they were dangerously close. He turned his head just slightly. "Clara," her voice came back, a ghost on the furious wind. "Still here?" He slowed just enough to let her regain her footing, then held her steady, with an arm around her shoulders as they crossed a narrow, fallen log. The wind shrieked like an ancient spirit in the trees. Upon reaching the far bank at last, Ethan urged the dogs onward, guiding Clara up a short rise. After nearly 30 minutes of fighting the gale, a dim shape materialized ahead. The dark, familiar shape of his cabin. Relief flooded him with an unexpected warmth. "We're almost there," he cried out. Rex barked once, the sound nearly stolen by the wind, and bounded up the porch. Ethan forced the door open, pulling Clara inside and slamming it shut against the raging storm. The abrupt silence was stunning. Only the sound of their harsh breathing filled the small room. Within the cabin held a soft, amber glow from the fireplace he had left smoldering. Ethan dropped his pack, slipped out of his coat, and swiftly added logs to the hearth. The flames leaped upwards, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Clara sank onto the bench by the fire, holding herself tightly for warmth. Her face was pale beneath a film of melting snow, tendrils of auburn hair plastered against her skin. Rex shook off the cold by the door, spraying water everywhere as Luna curled up close to the growing fire, letting out a faint whimper as warmth seeped back into her paws. Ethan knelt by the hearth, lost in the dancing flames. His mind was a storm, replaying the barn, the cages, the terror, that voice in the darkness. It woke something inside him, a heavy, familiar weight. The deep-seated need to act, to protect, to right this wrong. Clara's voice cut the silence. "That man," she said softly. "He's not working by himself." Ethan looked up, his eyes sharp. "What are you saying?" She rubbed her hands together, still fighting a tremor. "I've been chasing a story for months. A wildlife trafficking ring that operates across state lines. Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. They take animals from sanctuaries, zoos, sometimes directly from the wild. I thought it was just a rumor until tonight." Ethan leaned back against the wall. "So you came here hunting for them?" Clara nodded. "The last lead I had pointed from Colorado. A truck filled with captured animals vanished right near the Tetons. 1 week later, a park ranger turned up dead. They ruled it an accident. I never believed it for a second." She met his eyes, her own expression hardening. "And after tonight, I'm certain I was right." Ethan ran a hand wearily through his beard, breathing out slowly. "You realize they'll be hunting for you now?" "I know," she said, "which is why we cannot stay silent. We have the proof now." Ethan considered this, then rose and moved to a shelf over his workbench. He reached for an old military radio, its green frame dented and covered in thick dust. It looked ancient, yet the metal held a faint gleam in the firelight. Clara frowned. "You think that thing still works?" "It's Navy issue," he stated, as he set it on the table. "It always works." He connected it to a small backup battery, turning the dials with practiced precision. A low, constant static filled the small cabin. He turned the dial slowly, searching for a clean channel. Clara moved closer, her curiosity overcoming her exhaustion. "Who are you trying to reach?" "Anyone still listening?" he answered quietly. "This model uses emergency frequencies. It's an old SEAL protocol. If I can just get a signal out far enough, maybe someone from the reserve network will get it." She offered a faint smile. "You mean you're calling the cavalry?" Ethan didn't respond. He simply leaned forward, pressed the transmitter, and began to speak. "This is Ethan Cole, former Navy SEAL. I'm located approximately 20 meters west of Jackson, Wyoming. I've found evidence of an illegal wildlife trafficking operation. Coordinates will follow." He read out the GPS numbers slowly, his voice unwavering through the crackling static. When he was done, he released the transmitter and waited. For a long moment, there was only silence. The fire popped gently, and the wind outside hammered the cabin's frame. Clara stared at him, her expression hardening. "Maybe no one's out there." Ethan offered no reply. He recalibrated the frequency, sending the message once more. Another minute of hissing static crawled by. Then a faint voice cut through, distorted crackling yet clear enough to understand. "Message received. Stay put until sunrise." Clara's eyes widened. "They heard you." Ethan leaned back slowly, a tide of relief battling his deep exhaustion. He shut off the transmitter, his breath a heavy sigh. "Yeah, they did." Rex lifted his head, his ears twitching as Luna burrowed deeper by the fire. Clara gazed at the window where snow still fell in a heavy white curtain, obscuring the world beyond. Ethan stood in silence, watching the flames flicker across the walls. Deep inside, beneath his soldier's exterior, something long frozen started to thaw. Outside, the storm raged on, fierce and unyielding, yet it felt strangely like a shield. The storm finally broke, just before sunrise, giving way to a silence that felt almost sacred. A faint gray light began to glow through the cabin's frosted windows as the first light of dawn crept across the old floorboards. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat by the fire, his unwavering gaze fixed on the radio, waiting for a sound, a voice, anything. The flames had now burned low, and the scent of pine smoke mingled with the crisp smell of melting snow. Rex was stretched out by the hearth-head on his paws, while Luna was curled up beside Clara, who'd fallen asleep in her chair camera resting in her lap. And then it finally came, a faint crackle of static, then a clear voice cutting through the radio. "Team en route. ETA 15 minutes. Hold position." Ethan sat up straight, a shadow of relief passing over his weary face. "They're coming," he murmured. Clara stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. "Already?" He nodded. "First light." Outside, the world remained blanketed in pure white, soft and silent. The wind had died down to a whisper. But then a low hum of engines started to echo up from the valley, a sound alien to this wilderness growing louder with every heartbeat. Clara stepped to the window, clearing a small circle of frost with her glove. Headlights pierced the mist. 2, then 4. Then an entire convoy of vehicles snaked its way up the snowy trail. "They made it," she breathed, her voice thick with pure awe. Within minutes, the first vehicles crunched to a halt outside. 2 sheriff's trucks and a pair of black federal vans, and a snow crawler, its side emblazoned with the logo of the U.S. Wildlife Service. Men and women began to step out, bundled in heavy winter gear badges glinting in the gray dawn. Among them stood a tall man in his 50s. He was clean-shaven despite the bitter cold, wearing a dark parka with "Federal Agent" stenciled in bold letters across the back. His name tag read, Agent Donovan Pierce. Pierce had the hard-earned look of a man who'd spent decades in law enforcement. Sharp eyes creased by crow's feet, a firm square jaw, and the kind of calm that comes from a life of witnessing the worst. "Ethan Cole," he called, his breath misting in the freezing air. Ethan emerged onto the porch, his face a mask of calm resolve. "That's me." Pierce ascended the steps, offering a gloved hand. "Donovan Pierce, U.S. Wildlife Enforcement Division," he stated. "We received your transmission. I've been hunting these sons of bitches for months." Ethan shook his hand. "Then let's end this." Moments later, the clearing was a whirlwind of activity. Officers inspected their gear, while rescuers unloaded crates and medical supplies. And with them a young veterinarian doctor, Amelia Grant, preparing tranquilizer darts and portable heaters for the animals they hoped to save. Dr. Grant was in her early 30s, petite, her dark curls tucked under a wool cap. Her face was pale yet resolute. Her gloved hands moved with swift, practiced precision as she laid out syringes and tools. "4 minutes out in that blizzard. You're incredibly lucky to be standing," she remarked, looking up at Ethan with a respectful smile. He gave a slight nod. "We had help," he answered, his gaze shifting to Rex and Luna, who stood faithfully alert by the door. The convoy rolled out moments later with Pierce's vehicle taking the lead. The path to the barn was almost lost beneath the fresh snow, yet Rex knew the way instinctively. He bounded ahead, pausing occasionally to look back as if to guide them. The wind wailed across the empty plains, but the roar of the engines drowned out the forest's deep silence. Clara, sitting next to Ethan in one of the trucks, kept her camera poised. "The world needs to see this," she murmured. "Every last bit." When they finally reached the barn, the dawn had broken completely, spilling pale gold light on the snow. The building loomed like a raw scar upon the landscape, silent and half-collapsed, its wooden planks shimmering with frost. Pierce signaled for 2 agents to flank the structure from the sides. "No mistakes," he commanded. "We have no idea if anyone is still in there." Ethan stepped forward. "Let me go in first. I know the layout." Pierce hesitated, then nodded. "All right, you take point." Ethan forced the door open, its hinges shrieking in protest. The frigid stench of the place assaulted them instantly, rust, dirt, and utter decay. The beams of their flashlights sliced across the cages, exposing the same horrific scene Ethan had witnessed the night before. A few animals stirred faintly. Others remained completely still. Doctor Grant surged forward with her team, calling out orders. "Heat blankets over here, check for breathing. Easy now, slowly." One of her assistants, a young man named Kyle, with freckles and round glasses, knelt by a fox's cage and whispered gently, "You're safe now, little one. We've got you." Rex moved purposefully ahead, his nose to the ground, then began barking insistently toward the far corner. Luna followed close behind him, whining softly. Ethan moved toward them, a knot tightening in his stomach. There, half hidden beneath the straw, was a wooden crate nailed shut. He snatched a crowbar from a nearby workbench, wrenched the crate open, and then he froze. Inside 2 young lynxes, their eyes glassy with exhaustion, but alive. "Get the vet here," he yelled. Clara captured it all on her camera, hands shaking. This is national news," she whispered. "I can't believe it's actually real." Pierce drew near his face a grim mask. "Do you have any idea what this operation was worth? Hundreds of thousands on the black market? But you stopped it." Ethan just shook his head. "We only slowed it down. Someone much higher up is running this." Pierce gave a grim, determined nod. "Then we find them, but today we save who we can." For hours they toiled, cutting locks, lifting cages, and wrapping the terrified animals in blankets. 43 living souls were recovered. Foxes, eagles, owls, and deer, wolves, and small mountain cats. The barn that once held such pain became a theater of desperate compassion. Snow began to fall again, soft and silent, as if the world itself wanted to cover the wounds and start anew. By the time their work was done, the vehicles were loaded with crates and blankets. Dr. Grant walked over to Ethan, her eyes shining with exhaustion and raw emotion. "They're going to make it," she said. "Most of them. You did a good thing." He glanced at Rex and Luna sitting like sentinels at the doorway, their fur dusted with snow. "They did better," he replied quietly. Meanwhile, Clara stood several yards away, filming as the last of the animals were carried out. Her fingers were numb. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but a fire born of purpose sparked in her expression. "It's live," she said softly. "I uploaded it all. Navy SEAL rescues dozens of animals in blizzard." It's spreading like wildfire. Pierce overheard and gave a tired, knowing smile. "Good. Let the world see what real decency looks like." When the final truck pulled away, the rising sun spilled its light over the broken barn, painting the wreckage in gold. Ethan stood watching until the last echoes of the engines vanished into the trees. The ensuing silence felt profoundly peaceful. Pierce approached him one last time, extending his hand again. "You've done something truly incredible here. Son, most people would have looked the other way. You didn't." Ethan met his gaze for a long moment, then slowly shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "It wasn't me," he stated. "They were the ones who found me." Pierce followed his gaze to Rex and Luna, the two survivors who had once appeared trembling from the snow, and he nodded. Then maybe they knew exactly who they were looking for. As the light of a new morning spread across the valley, the snow glistened like spun glass, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt the crushing weight lift from his very soul. 2 months had passed since the storm, but its memory still clung to Ethan Cole like the scent of pine after a cleansing rain. Winter was finally loosening its brutal grip on Jackson, Wyoming. The air, once sharp and unforgiving, now carried the first gentle promise of spring. Meltwater ran down the cabin steps, and sunlight filtered through the pines in long golden shafts. The world that had felt so barren now pulsed with life again. Rex and Luna raced across the yard, their black and tan coats gleaming in the brilliant light, chasing one another through the last remnants of thawing snow. Their movements were confident, strong, and fully healed. Watching them, Ethan felt something inside him stir in perfect rhythm with their boundless joy. He hadn't worn his old Navy SEAL jacket since that night, but he still carried the ingrained habits it had built into him. Discipline, observation, and relentless caution. Yet now those instincts were turned toward far gentler purposes, checking his dog's paws for the scars of frostbite, ensuring their training equipment was meticulously clean, and mending the loose latch on the cabin's fence. He was learning how to live again, one small act of purpose at a time. That morning, a silver SUV broke the silence, crunching up his snow-dusted drive. Clara emerged her wave, cutting the cold sunlight. She was wrapped in a wool coat the color of oatmeal, a knitted beanie perfectly framing her vibrant auburn hair. Her face seemed thinner than he remembered, perhaps etched by long hours editing film, but her blue-green eyes still held a familiar sparkle of purpose. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice bright. "I brought someone who's been anxious to meet you." From the passenger side, a man emerged. He was a tall figure, likely in his early 40s, with dark skin and cropped hair, and he moved with a lean control that told Ethan everything this man had served. He had a slight limp, his left leg steadied by a carbon fiber brace. His smile when it came was slow, but entirely genuine. "Captain Marcus Reed," Clara said, making the introduction. "United States Marine Corps, retired. He runs the rehabilitation program for veterans at the Northern Wildlife Rescue Center." Marcus extended a hand, his